Hey guys, Michael here with Duet Justus, and welcome to another video in our DIY solar power series. Today I'm going to be covering how to wire your charge controller to your battery banks, and I'm also going to be covering fuse sizing in a little bit more depth to kind of give you an idea of what fuses are meant for and why they're great for a solar power system and a good idea for you to install. So let's go ahead and jump into the wiring from the solar charge controller to the battery bank. So we're right here next to the sub bay with the solar charge controller. As I said last week, I ended up getting a TriStar MPPT charge controller. This is an insanely efficient charge controller. It's a 60 amp charge controller, and it's a little bit overkill for our small system that we have in our RV, but we also bought this component with the intention of it growing with us, meaning if we wanted to take this component out of this RV and put it into a different RV or a different solar setup, we would be able to have a charge controller that would be able to handle what we wanted to put onto it. So yes, this is a little bit overkill for what we need, but it's also great to have in the sense of we can always expand our solar array. We can always expand other components if we needed to make a bigger system. So this is the charge controller we decided to get, and as you saw me mention on last week's video, we also talked about the wires coming down from the solar array, a positive and negative line coming into the charge controller. Now, to connect this charge controller to your battery, what you're going to have to do is wire it from the positive and negative side outgoing on this charge controller going to the positive and negative side of your battery bank. Now, your charge controller might be different. If you have a different brand charge controller, make sure to follow the instructions that the charge controller talks about. But if you have this specific one, there is an outgoing side, a positive and negative side that go to the positive and negative side of the battery. And let's jump over there and I'll show you where those are wired in. So I've got the positive and the negative wires coming from the charge controller through the sub bays. I drilled a hole and I've got protective casing that's protecting the wires so there's no excessive rub or anything like that that comes from the sharp metal that comes from drilling between those sub bays. So I've got this really thick gray piping that protects the wires. I've got the positive side going to the positive side of the battery bank, and I've also got the negative wire going to the shunt in the battery bank area. Now, you're probably wondering what a shunt is. I will go more into this in another video. That is for my battery monitor so that I can monitor the capacity of the battery. I will also be going into how I wired our four 225 amp hour 6 volt batteries into a 450 amp hour 12 volt battery bank. So just know that the positive line goes to the positive side of the battery, and if you don't have a battery monitor, the negative side goes to the negative side of the battery. If you do have a battery monitor, the negative side goes to the shunt that then goes to the negative side of the battery. My gosh, so much information. Solar is so interesting how this is, and it's hard for me to kind of portray this to you guys, but I promise you, if you watch all of these videos, it will all make sense when I'm all said and done. Okay, another thing that your charge controller will be getting potentially is a remote temperature sensor. So that is a device that allows the charge controller to monitor the temperature of the battery bank. And if for some reason you have your charge controller positioned in a distance away from the batteries, if there's a greater degree of, I think it's like 5 degrees, if there's a 5-degree temperature difference, this charge controller will account for that temperature difference and then charge your batteries accordingly, because temperature variations do affect the charging capacity needed to charge the batteries. So, okay, now that I've got all of that stuff out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and talk about fusing your solar system and why you need fuses in between each of your components and why it's a good idea to do that. When it comes to fusing in your solar system, basically I have all of my positive lines fused in between all of the components. Now, this is what I researched when I first started learning about solar, and it was the standard and recommended way of doing things. I did look at reputable sources. They did suggest fusing everything. So on the roof, from the solar panels to the combiner box, we have each of those positive lines fused from the solar panels. They are wired in parallel, so we are sending an excessive amount of amperage down through those lines. Because of that excessive amperage, we have thicker wires coming down from the solar array. Now I have a 60 amp fuse coming between the solar array and the charge controller, as well as 4-gauge wire. Now also from the charge controller to the battery bank, I've got 4-gauge wire and a 60 amp fuse. Now the reason that these fuse sizes are the way they are is because the distance that the energy is traveling and the amount of amperage that is going through them requires that there's that type of fuse. And the fuse is there, again, just under worst case scenario, if there's any excessive current that the system just can't handle. It's going to protect the components, it's going to protect the wires, and prevent a potential electric fire. A perfect example of how fuse sizing can vary, even in our system right now, is if we were to go up on the roof of the RV and we were to wire those 450 watt solar panels in series instead of parallel, we would have a 48 volt system sending down a much lower amount of amps. Now, if you haven't seen all of those videos, go check out our solar panel videos on how to wire in series and parallel, because that explains everything if you're confused. But you would need a much smaller wire and also a much smaller fuse to account for the lower amount of amps coming down from the solar array. So herein lies the conundrum that you might run into. It's basically a giant puzzle that you have to put together and figure out what works best for you. But if we were to wire all of those panels in series, and you might be thinking, well, yeah, why wouldn't you want a smaller size wire and a smaller size fuse? Well, ideally, yeah, you probably would, but when we're in an RV and there's shading issues, you don't want to wire your panels in series, because if one of those panels gets shaded, then the whole series, the whole solar array just does not work. So this is a perfect example of how everything can vary, and you guys just need to pay attention to all of these factors, put the puzzle pieces together, and create a system that works best for you. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video on how we wired our solar charge controller to our battery bank. I hope it helps you guys out in your personal installs, and just some of this information, the fuse sizing and all that stuff, gives you a little bit more insight into everything you have to think about when wiring your solar system together. Okay guys, that's going to do it for me today. If there's any questions you have about this particular setup, hit me up in the comments section below. I would love to answer your questions. Also, if you like this video, hit the like button down below. And if you want to see more videos on this tour of the solar system, we will be posting more in the upcoming weeks. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. You'll get notifications on all of that. Okay guys, I hope you're having an amazing day. And as always, I will see you on the next video.